Turning our program, please welcome Elizabeth Szynski, the Director of Business and Community Operations at the Wisconsin Policy Forum, will introduce today's speaker for us. Elizabeth?
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Joe Peterangelo, Research Director at the Wisconsin Policy Forum. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are Wisconsin's leading independent, nonpartisan public policy research organization, providing data-driven analysis on the issues that shape our communities, our economy, and our quality of life. The forum's work helps business leaders, policymakers, nonprofit organizations, and community members better understand complex challenges and make informed decisions. Joe has been a member of the forum's research team since 2011 and has served as research director since July of 2024. Over the past 15 years, he has authored many of the organization's most impactful reports on economic development, transportation, housing, and community issues affecting Wisconsin and Metro Milwaukee. Several of his reports have received national recognition from the Governmental Research Association for excellence in public policy research. Before joining the forum, Joe worked as a program coordinator for the United Way of Dane County, a planning assistant for the City of Milwaukee's Department of City Development, and AmeriCorps Vista volunteer with the Community Action Coalition for South Central Wisconsin. He holds a master's degree in urban planning from UW-Milwaukee and a bachelor's degree in sustainable development from the Evergreen State College. Joe speaks Spanish and basic Italian, lives in Milwaukee with his husband Victor and hundreds of plants, and brings both deep expertise and genuine passion for helping Wisconsin communities thrive. Today, Joe will be discussing a topic that is especially important to Milwaukee and communities across Wisconsin: small business. Small businesses are more than just job creators. They drive innovation, strengthen neighborhoods, support local philanthropy, and contribute to the vibrancy and character of our communities. Understanding both the opportunities and the challenges they face is critical to ensuring a strong economic future for our region. Please join me in welcoming Joe Peterangelo.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks to Rotary and everyone for having me here today. I wanted to start by sharing that in addition to my connection to Elizabeth as a member of this committee, one of my very close friends actually works for Rotary International, and she is in Taipei right now as well at the International Convention. She had the opportunity through her work. She is the General Manager and Chief Member and Participant Experience Officer for Rotary International in Evanston. And so she had the opportunity at this convention to meet Malala, who was the keynote speaker at the convention. Actually, she was the speaker steward for Malala, so she got to spend an entire day with her and interview her on the Rotary podcast. So everyone should check out the Rotary Voices podcast and hear my friend Nora interview Malala. So just wanted to share that. So Elizabeth already introduced the forum. I think many of you are familiar with the Wisconsin Policy Forum, but we are a nonpartisan research organization. We've been in Milwaukee for over 100 years. We're now also based in Madison. And so our purpose is really to produce research that helps to inform the public and policymakers on important issues, as well as generate conversation and debate. And we are supported by a broad membership, and Elizabeth is the person to talk to if you're not a member already of the Wisconsin Policy Forum. So we work on a really broad range of issues at the forum, and this is part of both what makes the work very interesting and always challenging. But this is an example, a set of examples of recent research we've produced that just shows kind of the breadth of what we work on, from development, economic development issues, criminal justice, housing, education, government finance, looking at the state budget every other year, government shared services, health, and even a recent report we published on the Betty Brinn Children's Museum as it's looking to move and expand. So we cover a whole broad range of issues. All of our research is free and available on our website. But today I am going to focus on some of our economic development work, specifically around small businesses, starting with a report that we just published a few weeks ago, and then I'm going to touch on a couple other publications that connect with this report. But I wanted to reintroduce Bon Wickenheiser, who is with us today from the Office of Business and Entrepreneurship at the University of Wisconsin, which commissioned this study. It was also supported by WEDC. The purpose of the report was to gather and analyze data about small businesses in the state to understand just what the trends, the challenges, the opportunities within the small business sector. There hadn't really been much research specifically about small businesses in the state, and that was the purpose of this research. So I'm going to show you a bunch of data from this report. The first one is just showing the number of small businesses in the state. And we defined small businesses as all private establishments with fewer than 500 employees based in Wisconsin. We found one of our first findings was that there's been an increase in the number of businesses, small businesses in the state since 2020, an acceleration of that growth that really outpaced the growth that we were seeing in the last decade. And a lot of that was driven by micro businesses. So the light blue bars here are measuring the number of micro businesses, which are businesses with fewer than 10 employees. We've seen a lot of growth in those businesses specifically. This is showing where the jobs are distributed within these businesses. And so this, again, the light blue bars are those micro businesses. The darker blue are businesses with 10 to 99 employees. And then the orange bars are those with 100 to 499 employees. So we actually found that a majority of the jobs are in those medium-sized businesses, and that they've also been the ones that have driven most of the job growth over time. So they're really important to job growth. And then one of the key findings of this report was that small businesses have accounted for 95% of all net job growth in Wisconsin since 2010. So that was much higher than I was imagining going into this. It was also much higher than the nation. About 72% of the net job growth came from small businesses nationally. So Wisconsin's very dependent on small businesses for job growth. At the same time, what we found is that Wisconsin has been keeping pace with the nation in adding businesses, but not in adding jobs within those small businesses. And this is showing the pace of job growth at these three different size groupings of small businesses. Wisconsin on the left and the nation on the right. We've really lagged the nation when it comes to job growth within our small businesses. And especially that's the case as the businesses get a little bit larger. And as I said, the more medium-sized small businesses are the ones that are really accounting for a lot of our job growth in the state. So that is a critical finding of this report and kind of points to the importance of scaling those really small businesses into that next level. We look at a number of other indicators in this report, including payroll. We look at the other economic indicators of small businesses. We know that payroll increased with inflation, especially over the last few years. That's been really positive for workers and families, especially in lower wage occupations. We've seen more robust job growth over the past few years. That's also been among the challenges for small businesses, with costs increasing kind of throughout their operations and putting pressure on their margins and leading to, in many cases, price increases and things like that. So we look at that. We also see that almost 80% of the wages paid to in the private sector in Wisconsin went to these small business employees. So a really big part of the state's economy. This is a breakdown of the sales. So we look at the sales impact and show which industries are really driving a lot of the sales that bring in sales tax revenue into the state. Manufacturing still continues to be our leading industry in Wisconsin, but you see wholesale, retail, trade, and construction are some of our other leading industries when it comes to sales and sales taxes. We look at what sectors are really driving growth in the state, and we found healthcare has been far and away the most critical sector to small business job growth, with accounting for about 2/3 of the net job growth in the state since 2010. We've seen some decline in some other sectors, but healthcare has really been really key. And then we compare Wisconsin's economy to the nation's, and this is a little bit more complex visual, but basically what we're showing here is how the distribution of jobs within small businesses looks in Wisconsin relative to the nation. So if these bars were all at a 1, it would mean that Wisconsin, the distribution of jobs was exactly the same in Wisconsin as it is nationally. So for example, retail, we look very similar to the nation in the concentration of those jobs in retail or in accommodation and food services. But we are really concentrated in manufacturing. We have about 1.8 jobs in small businesses in manufacturing relative to every one we would expect if we were mirroring the nation in our economic distribution. And then on the other hand, we are really, we're lagging on some sectors, including some that are really beneficial to the economy. Professional, scientific, and technical services, we only have about 3/4 of the jobs that we would expect if we were mirroring the nation again. And that's a sector that includes a lot of high-wage jobs that tend to require college degrees, things like legal services, engineering and architecture, advertising, marketing, things like that. So that's one area that we're lagging in, and we could use continued focus. We also look at some of the breakdowns by region. We see that the Madison area has been really dominating in adding small business jobs relative to the other metro areas in the state. You can see a few metro areas have lost small business jobs. Most of them have seen some growth, but Madison is far and away leading the state when it comes to that growth. And then some of the breakdowns, really to see kind of how the different metro areas look compared to one another. On the left, you see how manufacturing jobs are concentrated in each metro area. And so some of our metro areas are very, very dependent on manufacturing, especially some of our smaller metro areas like Oshkosh and Racine, where we're actually seeing job declines. Where Madison, for example, has a much more diversified economy, but still very strong manufacturing employment. And then on the right is the concentration of those professional, scientific, and technical jobs that I mentioned, the more jobs that typically require college degrees. Madison and Milwaukee are the only metro areas in the state that are really similar or even outpacing the nation in those jobs. And so we're seeing a lot of our smaller metro areas kind of lagging the nation when it comes to those jobs in those sectors. And then just one last slide on this from this report is looking specifically at the Milwaukee area, at what sectors have been adding jobs, which ones have been shedding jobs. Again, in this case, healthcare really has been critical to Metro Milwaukee's economy when it comes to small business employment. Without healthcare, we would have seen a net job decline in the Metro Milwaukee area since 2010. So that's been just very, very important. We've seen some losses in areas like retail, where there's been shifts to e-commerce, online shopping. And then finance and insurance, which seems to be driven more by consolidations, more larger companies and fewer small businesses. So that's some of the key findings from this report. Some of the other things that we learned by talking to small business experts around the challenges and opportunities were that specifically access to capital and really capital readiness, so having small businesses be ready to attract funding in order to grow their operations are some of the key challenges. So that includes things like financial education and literacy that can be a hurdle to a business really being able to prepare financial plans as well as business planning, just having all of that in place to be able to grow and have that financial support to do so. And then a couple other findings around the need to really have both place-based and sector-specific strategies when it comes to small businesses because of all these variations we see across the state and across the economy in different industries. And that workforce strategies should really continue to focus both with, we continue to really have a very dominant manufacturing sector that's really critical to the state's economy, continues to be so. Healthcare is really driving a lot of the growth, so those are both key areas to continue to focus our workforce development strategies on, and then as well, having that focus on the professional, scientific, technical services and information, which are where a lot of the tech jobs are, as other areas to really focus our workforce efforts. So I'm going to move into a couple other pieces that kind of add to this, give some more perspective, specifically here in Milwaukee, where we did a report, we did a project a couple years ago. So this isn't quite as new, but it adds context, like I said, to kind of what's out there to support entrepreneurship in Milwaukee and small business development. And so this project really attempted to understand that and really understand what organizations are out there, what's their role, what do they do to help small businesses, how is it all coming together as an ecosystem? Do we really have what we need to support entrepreneurship and small business development here in Milwaukee? We really focused specifically in this case on more of the Main Street type businesses and those really small micro businesses that have the most challenge in getting started and growing. This project was supported by several different organizations, as you can see there. And I should have noted here that we have our QR codes that Elizabeth has added to this presentation. This is an attempt to try to make it easy for people to find our research. So feel free to look up any of these reports later too online. But one other thing I wanted to note on this project, just a fun fact. I had an intern work with me on this project who was a UW-Madison student at the time. This was just a couple years ago. He now works for SpaceX, and they, with what's going on with SpaceX, we may have a millionaire former intern in our history here. So that's kind of interesting. But I'll just jump in here with a little more context. You don't have to read all this, but just the criteria for what we were including. We were looking at organizations in Milwaukee that provide one of these different types of core services that help businesses start or grow their operations. And what we found is about 50 organizations in Milwaukee that provide some sort of business support or entrepreneurship services in these different kind of categories. We looked at government organizations, those that focus on specific industries or areas of the city, the chamber type organizations that sometimes have a specific focus, like the African American Chamber, and then other nonprofits that work on small business. So about 50 organizations. We really found that all of those major areas of small business support are covered. There is some overlap. In some cases, that's not necessarily a problem because different people want to get support from different types of organizations, and there can be different kind of nuances in how the programming is offered. But there may also be, in some cases, too much overlap, or we could look for ways to streamline what we've got. There was some collaboration happening between individual organizations, kind of working together, referring people across organizations. And there were some bigger efforts, like Brew City Match was an initiative that LISC was running at the time that involved a bunch of different small business support organizations, including the one Elizabeth used to work with, Scale Up Milwaukee, which worked with small businesses to help them grow. Scale Up, unfortunately, no longer is with us. And Brew City Match is also no longer with us. So there's been some changes even since we did this. But so there was some collaboration happening, but we found that more could be happening. Some of our key takeaways from this was that there was no local organization that was really serving as the backbone for entrepreneurship support and small business support. There was a lot of different organizations working in this space, but no one kind of leading the charge and kind of coordinating the whole thing. We found some examples across the nation of some of these backbone organizations. For example, in Kansas City, there was a group called KC SourceLink that identifies itself as that backbone for entrepreneurship in the Kansas City area. They bring together all the different groups that support small businesses every quarter to help them, network and strategize together. They create initiatives when they identify issues or weaknesses in the community, and then they work together to address them. That was an interesting takeaway from this. The CDA, the Community Development Alliance, is sort of an example of that here in Milwaukee. That's an organization, it's an alliance of many organizations, public and private, that work on housing specifically and home ownership specifically. So, and then another thing was there was no obvious front door where entrepreneurs or small businesses could get connected to all of these services that are out there. There was a lot of just lack of awareness of who's out there and where to go for help. Again, the KC SourceLink group in Kansas City was a really interesting example because they provide a service where you can go online or you can go in person or call them and have be navigated based on specifically your situation as a business owner or entrepreneur. Be referred and directed to organizations that they're constantly tracking and that are part of their network. And so you're able to get the help you need when you need it. So that's sort of an interesting model we thought that we could perhaps learn from. In Milwaukee, we do have one sort of example of that with the Rental Housing Resource Center that's at Community Advocates. It co-locates many organizations that work on eviction prevention in different ways in the same space, so people can just know that that's the place to go, and whatever your challenge is, you can find whatever help is out there. Another thing, this again reinforces the first study, our newer study that I started with. We found a number of capacity gaps within the network of small business support organizations in Milwaukee, including that there were services that provided one-on-one business coaching. There were some services around financial education for small business owners and entrepreneurs, and there are a bunch of organizations that help them access capital. But all of those things were things that we heard the demand is outstripping the supply, and these are things that small business owners need, and more capacity is needed. And so that was another takeaway. And then I think this is the last kind of key takeaway was that we found some examples where there were stronger efforts, collaborative efforts among philanthropic groups in certain areas of the country that we looked at to coordinate their efforts and their funding around entrepreneurship and small business development specifically. So similar to what we're doing in Milwaukee, again, around home ownership with the Community Development Alliance, where several funders, Northwestern Mutual Foundation, for example, Zilber Foundation, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, are coordinating their support for home ownership efforts. In Detroit, for example, they have 13 different foundations that work together and coordinate what they're doing and what they're giving to around organizations that are supporting entrepreneurship and small business development specifically. So another model that we could look at. And then I'm just going to close with a few slides from one other piece that kind of connects with this. This is a data tool that we published that analyzes a bunch of economic indicators for Metro Milwaukee. And we've been doing this for a number of years where we're tracking these same indicators. We're tracking how is Metro Milwaukee's economy doing over time? How do we compare with other metro areas across the country and with the nation? on some of these key indicators. What are some of our strengths and areas where we might need to focus more? And so this is, again, there are 17 indicators. These are the categories that we look at within this data tool that you can go on and interact with yourself. And we look at 10-year trends as well for each of these indicators you can see here. So we cover a lot of ground here, but a number of them are related to entrepreneurship and small businesses. So again, connecting with some of our other work. And we update this every year. We'll update this again this fall. So a couple of our long-term strengths I just wanted to point out here include the educational attainment of our regional workforce. So in Metro Milwaukee, we have over 40% of adults 25 and over have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree, which is actually above the national average and compares favorably with the other 10 metro areas that we track. Most of them are peers, relatively similar to, or have many similarities to Milwaukee. We do include a few aspirational areas like Austin, Texas, that we want to be looking at, well, how do we compare to the ones who are really leading the nation and are kind of similar in size to Milwaukee? We also have a strength in our concentration of scientists and engineers, which are critical to innovation and driving innovation. And we have a higher than average concentration of scientists and engineers in the Milwaukee area, above the U.S. average and above most of our peers. We've also been, here you can see the specific types of engineers that we really have strong concentrations in: industrial, mechanical, civil, and electrical engineers especially. But then on the small business side and entrepreneurship side, the indicators are more mixed. We have had slower growth. Here we're showing the pace of growth in the number of micro businesses at the top and the smaller businesses in the 10 to 99 employee range. We're kind of on the lower end, and we've tended to be on the lower end in terms of that pace of growth. We look at business openings and closings to see how are we doing year to year in, are we having more businesses open or close? And in recent years, we've seen more businesses open than close every year, so that's positive. We are, doing a little better in comparison to our other peer metro areas on this over the last few years. We're also doing a little bit better in a long-term weakness of the region, which is around attracting venture capital funding for small businesses in the region. We've increased generally over the last decade or so in how much of that funding is coming in to businesses in the region, and had the highest amount in 2024 in the data that we've tracked. However, this is a longer-term weakness when we compare Metro Milwaukee with our peers. We've been typically on the lower end of bringing in venture capital funding. That's usually for some of those very high growth entrepreneur small businesses that are driving some faster growth in employment across the nation. And then also some of those deals that are completed in Milwaukee for venture capital tend to be smaller than in other areas. So some mixed indicators when it comes to entrepreneurship and small businesses. There's a lot more in this data tool. There's a lot more in all of these reports. So I'd encourage you to check all of them out. Also to, again, consider membership in the policy forum. If your organization is not already a member, you can go to our website and get more information and talk to Elizabeth. But I'll close there and happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Joe. I will now welcome the first question.
Yeah. Hi, Brent F. Wasson, MKE Business Coach. As you come up with this analysis, which I think definitely matches and was very enlightening, What are some of the outcomes and targets that you want to encourage organizations to do to pick up the mantle? Because you identified some shortcomings, there are some known gaps in the ecosystem. So what's the next step with the information that's out there?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question. Our role is typically to lay out observations, insights, ideas, and especially bring in also examples from across the country. We also try to drive conversation through our events and through our communications about our research. But really, we were hoping to just drive conversation on each of these areas. It's really, we don't advocate. That's a big part of the forum's identity is to put out ideas and insight, but not to really advocate for specific solutions. We did, though, find a number of areas where there could be improvements. However, it's up to, for example, on the philanthropic side, it's up to foundations to decide what their key priorities are. There is a gap here. There are some examples around the country, for example, in coordinating efforts around entrepreneurship. But there are a lot of needs in the Milwaukee area, and there's already a focus recently on housing. Does this rise to the level of philanthropy kind of choosing this as their next issue? Maybe or maybe not. That's sort of, that may be an unsatisfying answer, but it's sort of the role we play. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for being here and sharing this great information. My name is Kyle. I'm just curious, with the 1 to 10 businesses, do you know what percentage of them are people that either left corporate or were forced out of corporate that just turned around and started a consulting business? And is that a good economic indicator, not a good economic indicator? I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Those are great questions. It was something that came up as, in national research as one driver that both people either their job was unstable or the pandemic gave them an opportunity to take a step back and think about what they wanted to do and shift and maybe do something on their own instead of relying on a job that might have felt unstable at the time. It's a tougher question to ask whether that's a good thing or not. I think that it's kept the state growing small businesses that puts them in a position. Well, at least we have an increasing supply of small businesses, but it does create maybe even a more challenging environment to help those small businesses continue to grow. As Bon can attest, so many small businesses had to pivot during the pandemic, and they had access to temporary funding, in many cases federal relief funding that is now gone away. So there were some opportunities there that have now left, and it's kind of a critical moment to see how sustainable the businesses that have been created are, and to help as many of them survive as we can.
Hi, great to see you, Joe. Laura Bray, UWM Foundation. My question is, were you able to look at models nationally in this idea of having kind of one-stop shop that served the variety of kind of business needs? So my experience in Milwaukee is like the Brew City Match did a great job at providing resources to like the Main Street, looking at commercial district and commercial corridor, but the needs of like innovation coming out of UW-Madison or UW-Milwaukee and commercializing that is very different from the need. Yeah. But the list of things, access to capital, good business planning are the same, but the actual deployment of what those businesses need are different. And so did you find any examples where that one stop really looked at breadth what's needed for both cases? Yeah,
that's a great question. So the cities that we looked at in this report were Kansas City, Detroit, and Chicago. And I think all of them had some very valuable lessons there is somewhat of a divide between that focus on the Main Street businesses and the businesses that tend to be funded with more traditional sources versus those more tech-related and in Milwaukee even, we found that there was a coalition called Marshalling Our Resources. I'm not sure if they're still meeting, that was more focused on bringing together organizations that are more tech-focused and entrepreneurship-focused versus some of the other, like Brew City Match, that's more on the Main Street side. I do think that KC SourceLink, again, in Kansas City, they benefit from having the Kauffman Foundation in their community, and that helps to fund them. And so that could be difficult to replicate, but they seem to serve both of those sides in the work that they do in terms of being the backbone and the navigation organization. So they're not specific to one type of business or another.
Hi, I'm Teresa Esser. You talked about the importance of scaling small businesses to the next level, and you also mentioned the phrase access to capital. Currently, Wisconsin is following a policy of having a state-sponsored fund of funds that's $25 million total. So that's a rounding error on somebody else's fund. Our peer states have funds of funds that are 600 million more. I'm talking about in the Midwest. I'm not even talking about the centers of capital on the coasts. But we're going to have a new governor soon. And I wondered if you could tell me, of the folks who are running for governor, which candidate is most focused on expanding access to venture capital? Or are any of them? Please, is anyone who's running for governor focusing on access to venture capital at all? Thanks.
I really can't answer that question. I'm not really sure. I understood that Kelda Roy's was more entrepreneurship focused. I really don't know though. And Missy Hughes has her background at WEDC, but honestly, I can't really answer that.
Maybe this is one you can't answer. John Franke, do your employment, the numbers that you shared with us, include employees who work outside Wisconsin for a Wisconsin or a Milwaukee-based small business? And did your research provide any insight into the extent to which Wisconsin-based small businesses employ people elsewhere and how that might compare nationally?
That's a really good question. We did isolate in all of our data. For example, when we looked at the metro areas, some of the metro areas cross state boundaries, and we isolated for only the counties within the state that were part of it. But there could be, I believe there could be workers outside of the state that are included. The federal data we used for the report was based on reporting to the state's unemployment system. So I believe, though, that there can be employees that are based with an employer in the state, but that are covered and live. That's a good question that I should probably dig into further. But we didn't compare Wisconsin with other states in that regard in this particular study. Yeah.
Hi, Joe. My name is Emily Honor Hubbard. I'm the owner of Empathic Engineering, and as a business that supports small to mid-sized manufacturers in adapting to technology, upskilling, I'm curious, having been on both sides of this elusive front door to small business support, do you have an idea of even a few channels that might emulate that idea of connecting small businesses in Milwaukee? I'd say that's a big challenge that I've navigated over the past.
Yeah, so there is one tool called Start in Wisconsin. That's only an online tool, but WEDC developed it, I believe, and supported it initially, and now there is a local coalition called Project Reach that is financial institutions and small business support organizations that do coordinate and that's been a focus of them and sustaining that tool. That's a tool that has information about organizations across the state that provide small business or entrepreneurship services. It's not any kind of individualized guidance or, you can't talk to somebody through that service, but it's at least a piece of the puzzle that is out there. Again, I thought that Brew City Match was an example because it involved many different organizations, and every participant that was part of that program was matched with a guide, essentially, someone from one of the organizations that could help them navigate and figure out if they were the right organization to help, or if there was like a training or a certain service out there that could be ideal for that candidate. Unfortunately, Brew City Match, like I said, it was funded for several years. I believe it lost funding and hasn't continued. So yeah, we've kind of taken a step back a little bit in what we had in a few ways. And so I think the Start in Wisconsin tools is the only thing I'm aware of that really plays that role.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you again to Joe.
Thank you, everyone.